This program is mandated by the Department of Transportation, and each driver is to receive training for 60 minutes minimum. Why drug testing? Substance abuse or drug testing is a major cause of accidents, which causes death, serious injury, property damage. So it is something that the government is doing to help eliminate this problem. It can destroy families, livelihood, life, not only of the abuser, but of those victims of that abuser or the families of that abuser. The costs involved in substance abuse range from 60 to $100 billion a year. Those costs incurred are from the accidents of property, of deaths, of hospital bills. They go further than that. We have to look into the costs of the police, courts, prisons, healthcare benefits increase, drug testing programs such as we're talking about now, lost time at work, wasted energy, lost talent. Abusers suffer work performance by averaging 40 days off a year, where a normal average worker is off 4 days a year. The abuser is late for work more often than an average person. They request early dismissal 2.2 times more often. They use 3 times more of the usual benefits than the average worker. They are 5 times more likely to file compensation claims. They're involved in 3.6 more accidents, and they also affect fellow workers working with them. The end result is abuse to the body. Why drug testing? The U.S. Navy in 1981 conducted their drug testing program, and they found that their people 25 years of age and below had almost 47% positive abuse. After drug testing was instituted, it dropped to just below 9%, a 38% drop by instituting a drug program. After they incorporated random testing, it dropped to less than 3%, or 44% less than the original rate before they started. Today, 1/3 of the U.S. corporations, major U.S. corporations, incorporate drug testing. Next, we will view a video called Substance Abuse and the Truck Driver. And after that, we will outline the DOT regulations so that you can understand what the drug abuse program is all about.
Mixing drinking and driving can be deadly. Drinking while driving is not a humorous scene. Property loss can be astronomical when an intoxicated person is behind the wheel. And thousands of people lose their lives each year due to this careless and thoughtless act. Alcohol is an intoxicating agent. It is found in fermented and distilled beverages. It causes physical and mental control to be markedly diminished. Ray Hobson, retired Director of Safety for a national motor carrier and conductor of numerous reaction time tests, gives us some insight on the results he has compiled in his 50 years in the safety field.
We have made brake detonator tests on with people that drinking, and it will add all the way from 5 to 20 foot per bottle of beer that they drink. And after they get about 5 or 6 beers, why, the sky's the limit then of when they're going to stop. About the best place they're going to stop is when they clobbered a wall or something of that nature. And you know, there's a lot of people, it's the operator of the vehicle that gets killed in rear-end collisions. And you've always got to remember this, that anybody that runs into the back of somebody from lack of stopping distance, he's the first guy to that accident. And of course, talking to people that says that they can hold their alcohol or hold their beer, hold their whiskey, in other words, I've had people tell me they was a better driver when they had 2 or 3 beers, and they was a better driver when they had a couple of shots of liquor. And let them have their couple of shots of liquor and then put them in an outfit with a brake detonator on, and you can prove right now that they're not. I never was apprehensive about calling their bluff at all, and I never did lose when I'd call their bluff.
The consequences of driving under the influence could have a serious impact on you and your family, with the burden being carried by your loved ones, and unwanted publicity for you, because you may be dead wrong. According to John Weisenfels, attorney at law, the legal and personal consequences can be devastating.
The ramifications are twofold. There are, first, the ramifications as it affects your driver's license and the ability to continue to operate a motor vehicle on the state highways. And the second thing is the criminal implications of driving under the influence of either alcohol or drugs. If you either refuse to take a blood test or a breathalyzer test or any number of a series of tests, you can lose your driving privileges for up to a year. And essentially, the penalties criminally escalate as the violations escalate. For instance, the first offense is specified at a certain criminal penalty. The second offense is a greater penalty. And the third offense typically will result in you being classified as a habitual abuser of drugs or alcohol and result in the maximum sentence that can be imposed with no hope of parole or suspension of sentence.
For those who are concerned or who have reason to suspect they have a substance abuse problem, most communities offer programs for individuals with alcohol dependency problems. How do you find out where they are? Consult the yellow pages of your phone book under Alcoholism Information and Treatment. Several private centers and hospital programs may be available, as well as Alcoholics Anonymous. In most metropolitan cities, the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse is available to provide guidance and help with that first big step. All inquiries are kept personal and confidential, according to Daniel Waits, Director of Lakeside Treatment Center in Kansas City, Missouri.
All inquiries are confidential. When people come in here for treatment, we treat their being here as very confidential. Not only their inquiries, but them being here, and by law we have to.
Many treatment agency and professional people who help those with alcohol problems receive calls daily from concerned individuals who are aware of a friend or loved one with a dependency problem. The question asked most often is, what can I do? These experienced professionals suggest that most times the solution is not going to be easy.
First thing to do is that you have to know that there are a lot of avenues of help available, both free and fee for service. In many cases, the loved ones will not even challenge or acknowledge that, you know, dad's got a problem or the wife's got a problem, because to do so is threatening to the relationship, threatening to themselves in one way or another. You'll hear a lot about tough love. I'm sure your viewers have heard a lot about tough love. If you continually allow that person to maintain their addiction, to maintain their use, the question is, are you loving them to death? You know?
Be responsible for your actions. And remember, if you drink and drive, you could be dead wrong. Drug addiction and 18-wheelers generally present a threefold problem. Drug abusers are usually dependent on alcohol, too. So the ingredients for a ticking time bomb become drugs, alcohol, and the big rig, according to Dr. Pierre W. Keitches, Director of Pathology for a major hospital.
No question there's a much higher incidence of alcohol abuse in drug users, especially the poly drug users. It almost seems to look sometimes like the alcohol's a link to get them between fixes and high.
My brain will not discriminate between my having an ounce and a half of good scotch and probably a Valium. My brain is going to say, that feels good. It's not going to say, oh, that feels good because that's scotch, or that feels good because that's a Valium. Fact is, it affects the brain, the neurochemistry of the body.
Drugs, ideally, are substances intended for use in the diagnosis, treatment, or cure of diseases, and are intended only for the individual for whom the doctor prescribes them. Drug abusers are people who take drugs for the narcotic or mind or mood-altering effects that drugs can produce. The legal consequences of drug involvement can be costly and damaging to your self-respect, your future, your life.
It gets to be a very, very expensive proposition if you've ever had your driving privileges revoked, both from the standpoint of employing legal counsel as well as having to face higher insurance costs, not only for the year of the event, but for a long time in the future. All of us have obligations to meet financially, and if you can't meet those because you don't have income coming in, you jeopardize everything you work for. You jeopardize being able to keep your home. You jeopardize being able probably to keep your cars if you have any kind of car payments. And it leads to some useless stress and strain on your family situation.
And aside from that, the criminal penalties that apply with drug possession, either misdemeanor, a period of up to 1 year's incarceration, or a period of 2 to 5 years, depending on if it's a felony or misdemeanor.
What constitutes probable cause in suspecting substance abuse in drivers?
Generally, it's some type of erratic driving that's caused them to bring themselves to my attention. The car might be weaving within the lane or across the center stripe. The individual might be driving with their bright headlights on their high beams, affecting other drivers, or they might be driving at an excessive fast rate or excessively slow rate on the highway.
Two of the most common street drugs are marijuana and cocaine. Marijuana, commonly referred to as pot, weed, or grass, is usually smoked in cigarette form. Cocaine, or coke, is a refined white powder derived from coca leaves. A powerfully seductive narcotic, it is usually snorted through the nose or dissolved and injected. Cocaine is also sometimes smoked or freebased. Another form of cocaine which has more recently become widely abused is crack or rock, a crystalline form, hence its name. It is smoked somewhat as is the condensed marijuana resin hashish. Crack is the deadliest, quickest addicting, most overpowering form of cocaine. Many substance abusers are not aware of the effects the drugs have on their system. Dr. Keitches comments.
The immediate, pretty much universal effect is they affect the brain. This ad that shows the brain frying like an egg is well taken. Most, if not all, of these drugs interfere with the receptor sites on nerve cells in the brain that take information or receive a stimulus to pass on information from certain chemicals that are in the brain. They're either interfered with or stimulated or negated, or the receptor site is occupied or something. The bottom line is it follows up transmission of appropriate impulses from brain cells. And so you immediately can see inordinate excitement or inordinate depression or inordinate feeling of well-being, derangement in judgment, impairment of decision-making, etc.
But street drugs aren't the only drugs that cause trouble. Many addicting or mood-altering prescription drugs fall into the substance abuse category.
Anyone that doesn't know prescribing steroids is becoming a serious problem just has to pick up the sports page every day. And that's one that's ominous because it still is in the definite, which it is, properly so, category of a medication. It's a good medicine, helps a lot of people, but it has profound effects on the body. Others are the amphetamines you can get as prescription drugs, diet pills, even aspirin is not without its effect. I'm not saying that aspirin is bad. Any drug, when it's indicated and given in the right dose for the right reason for the right period of time, can be good.
You owe it to yourself to ask your doctor questions about the prescription you are receiving. What are its effects? Can it be addicting? If you are not satisfied with the answer, you should feel comfortable seeking a second opinion.
No, not out of line. I think you have an obligation to yourself. And physicians get very busy, and they're trying to do the best job they can, but sometimes you have to get them to take the time to explain to you. So I think it's a very appropriate question. I think you'll find fewer and fewer physicians getting irritated by those kinds of questions. My advice to a lot of people is if your doctor gets upset because you ask those questions, maybe you should think a little about who's your physician.
The alternatives to drugs include getting plenty of rest and eating properly. Avoid a steady diet of fatty foods and exercise regularly. Drugs add to stress. They stress your body. Following good health guidelines helps to eliminate stress in your personal life and on the job. Experience is the best teacher. Bob Cope, truck driver and rehabilitating alcoholic and drug addict, relates his version of what drugs can do to your life. His version of Dante's Inferno.
I alienated friends, family, just virtually everything. Because when I went to prison, I went to prison when I was, 24, 25 years old. Now I'm 31 years old. And I'm looking back at all these wasted years, you know, and what do I have to show for it? Not a whole lot. It's scary looking back at how I used to be. You know, I don't even know how people tolerated me. I would go on maybe week-long crank runs, you know, speed runs, until, you know, I'd start seeing things. And when the DEA catches up with you and takes your house and your car and your land and everything else you've ever owned in your life and just takes it from you, sends you to prison, you end up right back from ground zero. And it's not fun, starting over all over again with nothing. I mean nothing.
Being chemically free now for 4 years, how do you handle drowsiness and stress while on the road?
Well, for me, the only thing that works is talking to somebody. If I've had a bad day and just one of those days where everything and anything that could possibly go wrong has gone wrong, and the only thing I can do is find a good friend or a spouse or somebody that'll sit down and listen to me. And if you're out on the road and you're feeling stressed out or wrung out, tired, probably the best thing that you could probably do is pull over to a truck stop or any place where there's people. Get out and walk around and have a cup of coffee and talk to somebody. And you'd be surprised.
If you have a problem with substance abuse, or even suspect you do, consult your doctor, who can guide you to a local rehabilitation program. Many companies, unions, and other organizations now offer drug rehabilitation programs for employees or members. On the other hand, you may have a friend or loved one with a drug abuse problem, and you want to know what you can do to encourage that person to seek help as early as possible.
Get professional help. Get professional help. Get professional help. This is not something you and a bunch of friends should deal with, because it isn't just that this individual is abusing alcohol and drugs. He has other serious problems, either mental or physical or hereditary or family, that are precipitating this. And you are not, as a layperson, equipped to handle it.
You can pick up the telephone book and call your crisis line in any city. Wherever you are, you can call the crisis line, and they'll put you in touch with Al-Anon, Alcoholics Anonymous, Alateen. There's an 800 cocaine line if it's a cocaine problem. There's Narcotics Anonymous. There's just so many resources available. There's so many professionals who will help you if your loved one is in denial, has a problem with saying, hey, I really do have a problem. Most addicts and alcoholics will not readily acknowledge that they do, in fact, have a problem.
What one word would you use to discourage someone from taking drugs?
And it's just simple. First, don't.
Yeah, just don't. Yeah. Life's too short.
I just like to end with one word: don't.
Continued chemical dependency ensures failure. Never carry failure forward. It should rest in the past, where it belongs. Be a winner. Be aware of and avoid the dangers of alcohol and drug abuse.
On November 21st, 1988, the United States Department of Transportation issued a final rule on controlled substance testing. It gave the larger carriers until December 21st, 1989 to put their drug testing program in effect, a 13-month period. So those companies with drivers, 50 drivers or more, were required to start at that time. The smaller companies with drivers in number of less than 50, they were given an additional year to start their drug testing program. Theirs was to be started by December 21st, 1989. The drivers that must be tested are drivers that must be tested are drivers of commercial vehicles weighing more than 26,000 pounds, hauling interstate merchandise, or bus drivers transporting 15 passengers, including the driver, or hazardous material drivers. They are all subject to the drug testing program. The types of tests to be given start with pre-employment. Pre-employment test is given to any driver applicant who is required to be DOT qualified. He has to give his permission to submit to a drug test, and it is a condition of employment which he must pass. If he takes the test, he is not hired. He has 60 days to request the results of that test. Next, we have a periodic drug test. You as a driver must take this test for your first medical examination after implementation of the drug testing program. If random comes into effect, random testing, it will be only once that you will have to be tested on your periodic physical. Next, we have reasonable cause. Reasonable cause is observable actions documented by a supervisor and a witness. Actions that give reasonable cause to believe that the driver is under the influence of drugs. His behavior is witnessed by one and a witness if possible, and will be tested immediately. Random drug testing is an unannounced test by random selection. It is set up that 50% or more of the drivers must be tested over a period of a year. And those tests must be spread out over the entire year. The first year has a little different setup, and that will be explained once random is instituted. Post-accident testing is required of a driver if he receives a citation for a reportable accident. A reportable accident is an accident where there is death, serious injury, or over $4,400 worth of damage. It is a driver's responsibility to receive the drug test within 32 hours. In the case where a driver is injured and unable to report for a drug test, if he is hospitalized, he must release his medical records so they can be checked for the drug report. At this time, random testing and post-accident testing are deferred pending judicial review. They can be instituted at any time, although in the post-accident area, an officer of the law may override this and require a driver to take a drug test. The next area we'll look at is the drugs that are to be tested. The DOT has selected 5 different substances to be tested, and no more than these 5 may be tested at this time. If more than these 5 are to be tested, a separate sample will have to be taken for those additional tests of those additional substances. Some companies require more than these 5 to be tested. The first one is marijuana. Marijuana is a mood-altering chemical. The main chemical is THC, which is referred to on the street as grass, pot, weed, reefer. Second one, cocaine, is a nervous system stimulant, can be a local anesthetic, is no longer a legal medicine, and it is known as coke, crack, rock, flake, among others. Third is opiates. They are natural and synthetic drugs that work on the central nervous system, the bowels, and to control pain. They also control diarrhea and coughs. Street names for opiates: heroin, horse, junk, smack, and H, among others. Fourth item that is being tested is amphetamines, and they are drugs that affect the central nervous system. They are a stimulant, they keep you awake, and they cut your appetite. Street names are speed, bennies, dexies, uppers, pep pills, among others. And the last one are phencyclidines, and they are synthetic anesthetics that act as both a stimulant and a depressant, and are also hallucinogenic. Street names are angel dust, hog, crystal, supergrass, embalming fluid, and rocket fuel. Remember, these are mood-altering chemicals which can be dangerous to your health and your actions. The source of accidents, of the costs that we discussed earlier. The drugs sample is collected at a collection site named by us. We have 3 distribution centers. We have drivers at each one of those. Each one of those DCs has an assigned collection site. And upon orders to take a drug test, you will be sent to one of those sites. The collection site is restricted. They must have the proper materials, equipment, proper facilities and supervision for the urine specimens. And it must be run under DOT regulations. They have very specific guidelines, and some of the procedures that will be included upon a visit. Your photo ID will be checked to make sure that you are you. Your outer garments will be checked to make sure that you may not want, so that you are not able to substitute your sample or influence your sample in any way. You're entitled to privacy in giving your sample as long as there's no reason to believe that you would tamper with your sample. You will initial the sample's security label and sign the form provided. The sample will then be forwarded to the lab for testing. The sample will be analyzed by a NIDA certified laboratory. This laboratory is one that is approved by the government and is on the list of approved laboratories. They are published, and only certain laboratories are allowed to check, legally check the samples. When a sample is received, it is given an immunoassay screen, and what that does, it eliminates negative traces of controlled substances. In other words, if everything is negative, that's the only test that will be given. In the case of a substance that shows positive, a completely separate test will be given. That is called a gas chromatography mass spectrometry test, and it'll double test any positive readings by the first test. If the first test shows a positive for a drug and the second test also shows positive, it would be considered a positive. If one is negative, one is positive, it is considered negative. Once the samples are tested, a person known as an MRO has the responsibility of reading those tests and deciding whether they're positive or negative. An MRO stands for a medical review officer, and he is a qualified person in the area of drugs, most likely a medical doctor, who is familiar with drugs and abuse disorders. His primary function is to review, interpret, and report positive test results of drivers or applicants, and will report the negative results to the management official of each company. If the person tested tests positive, the medical review officer will consult the driver who tests positive to see if there's a possibility that that driver was under prescription medication that may have caused the positive reading, or some other substance that may have, and he will determine whether or not the driver is qualified or not qualified. If in the event there is a positive test, the MRO will make a reasonable attempt to try to locate the driver, and the driver must plead his case within 5 days of the first contact. Otherwise, he would be considered positive and not legal to drive. If a driver does test positive, he may not, or she may not, get behind the wheel. If a driver refuses to take a drug test, he is not qualified to be on the road. One part of the drug program that is very important is the EAP, or the Employee Assistant Program. We must provide education and training about controlled substances, which we are doing here, to drivers and supervisors of the company. Later we will be watching our company's EAP video, which will give you a real good idea of how it works and what it's all about. We learn to recognize problems and help those in need of help, be it our fellow drivers, be it our fellow workers, and this training should help those abusers in need of help. Rehabilitation is the last part of the program, is an area that we do not have to provide. We may provide it if we wish, or if we were under a bargaining agreement, would be a negotiable item. We have record keeping requirements to maintain. For this drug testing program. Each driver's qualification file will keep records of his tests. The MRO will keep records, and we must keep an annual report of the findings of all these tests. Some are required for 1 year, some required for 5 years. One of the things we would like to share is the identification of a person under the influence and some of the things that we can look for, clues to knowing that someone has a problem. First thing we would look at probably is his speech. Is it clear and understandable, or is it slurred, hesitant, incoherent, whispering? What about his balance? Is that normal? Swaying, stumbling, falling, reaching for support? How about his awareness? Is it normal? Or is he sleepy, confused, paranoid? Does he have a lack of coordination, restiveness? What about his work patterns? Does he come in on time, look neat, or is he all messy and late? Does he fail to show up some days? Does his productivity decline? Does he have disagreements with others? Does he have a problem following directions? Does he disappear during the day from time to time to the restroom or areas where he can't be seen? Does he fluctuate between being tired and awake and back the other way again? These are some of the things to kind of watch for, because those are signs of, possible signs of someone being under the influence. There are some additional symptoms we could probably look at. If somebody's got muscle cramps, chills, sweating, nausea, it can be a craving for a substance. Cocaine produces stuffy running noses and eczema around the nostrils. And amphetamines show excessive irritability and depression. Almost any of them will show impaired judgment, inability to concentrate, lack of interest, and the quality of their performance suffers drastically. Marijuana would show bloodshot eyes, fast heartbeat, dry mouth and throat. Reaction time is slow, coordination is reduced, and their memory is affected. These are some of the things that we could keep our eyes open for, and if we suspect that someone is under the influence, especially a driver, it's best to keep them off the road and have them checked first if necessary. And that must be done by a supervisory official, better done by 2, or at least another witness, and that has to be put in writing if that does take place. We will finish our program with a video put out by SuperValue on our Employee Assistance Program. After our EAP video, we would like to take questions. We understand that this information is a little sketchy and not in most detail. There are probably a lot of questions. If we don't know the answers, we will surely find out and get back to you. So while you're viewing, if you think of something, jot down your questions and we will cover them after the video.
Hi, I'm Mike Wright. In May of 1987, SuperValue introduced a new drug and alcohol policy and an employee assistance program. We have a long history of supporting employees and their family members who may have drug and alcohol problems. But only a few of our divisions had employee assistance programs before May of '87. Shortly after the policy became effective and drug testing became a part of SuperValue's efforts to maintain a drug-free workplace, nearly all divisions established their own employee assistance programs. How successful have we been? Well, overall, we feel our company's programs have been very successful. I believe SuperValue has one of the most effective, comprehensive programs in all of the food industry. And you know, we probably have one of the better programs across all of American industry. We have had individual failures, and we've had to terminate people because of work problems relative to abuse of alcohol and illegal drugs. Cocaine has been a particularly difficult drug for employees to beat. Please believe me, the terrible things you hear about crack and cocaine in the news media are all very true. They're taking a terrible toll on our nation. This powerful, addictive drug is very difficult to treat, and our negative experience is similar to what other employers are seeing as well. The National Institute on Drug Abuse estimates that 11% of our country's population over the age of 12 has used cocaine, and 2% are currently users. That's nearly 3 million cocaine users. But despite everything you read about the billions of dollars being spent on illegal drugs in our country, the biggest problem at SuperValue, and I think the biggest problem across the nation, is still the abuse of alcohol. Dr. Mark Gold, a noted physician and director of the nation's best-known cocaine research program, calls alcohol the most destructive drug known to mankind. The news is not all bad, however. Our employee assistance programs have become an integral part of our employee benefit program. Statistics reported by our employee assistance program providers indicate that in the past year, 7% of our employees or family members of employees have sought help from a company-sponsored employee assistance program. For the most part, we do not know who these employees are because confidentiality is the cornerstone on which we have built the program. Of course, employee assistance programs are not just for those with alcohol and drug problems. In fact, our usage reports from program providers, which incidentally provide numbers only and no names, indicate that less than 30% of employees seeking help from our employee assistance program providers are concerned with alcohol or drug problems. The majority of employee assistance cases involve family relationships, psychological problems, and legal issues. This service to employees is for any of these problems that affect the human condition. It can bring you the finest professional help in your community to assist you in facing these problems and to help members of your family as they face these problems. Sometimes the Employee Assistance Program can play such a dramatic role in a person's life that he or she casts aside the confidentiality of the program as a way to promote the concept and help others who have trouble in some aspect of their life so that they may also use the program to seek help. We will now hear from some employees who have used the resources provided by the company, and they have generously and, yes, heroically agreed to participate in this video in order to encourage you and members of your families to use the employee assistance programs if they're needed. I sincerely appreciate their cooperation, and I know you will also appreciate it after you hear their stories.
Were involved in the marriage. Through the counseling with the Employee Assistance Program, I was able to come to terms with the fact that it was a devastating relationship, and it was time for me to do something for myself.
Up until the point I got treatment, I was not so much into the alcohol as I was into the drugs. My drug of choice at that time was crank. I used that a lot, and it started, I felt it starting to affect my work. I had already basically lost and was in the process of losing my family, and it didn't really seem to bother me. But as I could see my job starting to maybe fall away on the wayside, that's when I went into treatment.
Dispatcher notified me when I called in that day that I was have to get a doctor's release before I could come back to work. I wasn't going to any doctor. I wasn't going to go. I was definitely sick. There wasn't no question about that. But it was all alcohol and stuff. So a while before that, I had received some literature through the company on alcohol and drug abuse. So the wife talked to me a little bit, and I finally contacted the personnel manager and set up an appointment, and the wife and I went down and talked with him, and I finally consented to seek help. And
I went through a divorce, and the minute that happened, I felt like a loser. I just could care less whether or not I lived. I wish I could die. I thought about committing suicide. I've never succeeded, thank God for it. And I just pray to God and thank God for finding me the help and let me go through alcohol treatment center so I could get my life back on the right track and just be happy with myself, be proud of myself, which is something that I never was before. I thought I was, but deep down, I really had nothing to be proud of as long as I was a user of alcohol.
Don drank for 22 years, heavy drinking there towards the last. First year we were married, he did not drink, but for 22 years, I prayed that he would quit drinking, and it just went from bad to worse until he hit his bottom and realized that he did have a drinking problem and sought help.
the help is there. Of course, you have to remember that you're the only one that can do it. Just pick the phone up and contact the AP, and I haven't regretted a minute of it.
The support that I was given from my company through going to the treatment center has been tremendous. My life, as well as my job have changed for the better in more ways than one. I've been able to get, I feel, the respect back from the people I work with. I've also been able to progress in my job and use my abilities that I have and always have had, and who knows now where I may end up going.
The treatment center has changed my life in a very dramatic way. All the wonderful responses and feelings that I have now, I could never get into full detail. But the most promising one that I really enjoy about myself now is that I can call myself a man. I can live up to my responsibilities. I'm not afraid of making a mistake.
Some people will say, well, I don't like talking to strangers. And if they've never been to a counselor, I can see where they would have that concept that you are talking to a stranger, but you're really talking to a trained professional.
I came around and realized finally that I wanted this for me. And then when I started feeling that way, everything started falling in place a little bit better. I felt better inside and stuff. So I highly recommend the program. I think it's just one of the best programs there is.
I would recommend the EAP program to not only problems of drug or alcohol, but there are so many other problems people may have in their life that they are able to seek help and get the help through the EAP program that we have. And problems such as financial problems, other things that don't necessarily relate to an alcoholic or a drug problem. There's so many things, just living can be a problem. A person needs to find help in coping with stress of day-to-day living. As a supervisor, the EAP program has been very beneficial. It enables us as supervisors to fight that urge of being a counselor. We're not a professional counselor by any means, and the EAP program gives us a tool to refer a person to, that if we feel there could be a problem or if there's any indication of any problems that might be out there, the EAP program is there for us to refer the person to go to.
If you do not know where to go and who to contact, call your employee assistance program. This is what Don did when he finally realized he had a drinking problem. And this is where we got our help. And it has changed our lives completely.
Our purpose in implementing employee assistance programs in each division was to help employees and their family members with their problems. Each of the employees you just saw took advantage of the resources this company is making available to help people who have trouble in their lives. Remember, the trouble does not have to be drugs or alcohol. Our employee assistance programs are prepared to help employees and their families with nearly any problem. Sometime in our life, each of us can reasonably expect to face a situation where an employee assistance program can be an invaluable, helpful tool. There is another aspect of our drug and alcohol abuse policy, which was adopted in May 1987, which we need to comment upon. And that policy has served us very well over the last couple of years. However, there is a new federal law which, along with many procedural changes, may cause us to alter fundamental elements of the existing policy. The biggest change would be the routine use of random testing for truck drivers, a practice that was counter to our philosophy when we drafted the original policy. Although still an issue in the federal courts, it is very likely that we will be required to begin random testing of truck drivers on or sometime after December 21, 1989. Of course, if the law mandates such testing, we have no choice but to comply. Our intent, however, is to do no random testing beyond the requirements that the federal government imposes upon us. I again would like to take the time to thank all of the employees who appeared in this video. I admire them for their courage. I respect them for seeking help for their problems. And I hope that they provide to others in our Super Value family an inspiration to seek help for problems that you may be encountering. We know that these personal problems can detract from the quality of our lives, both here during the hours of work, but also the lives that you have with your family and loved ones. Thank you for taking the time to view this video, and let's hope we continue to make our Employee Assistance Program a very successful one. Thank you.